the distinguished founding Vice Chancellor, Professor Rajkumar, my very distinguished friend and colleague, Ambassador and Professor Mr. Mohan Kumar, Professor Pathak, Professor Ravi Thapa, Professor Shriparna Pathak, distinguished faculty members and all the young students who've assembled here today. I'm truly delighted to be in the Popi Jindal University. It's really fascinating to visit the campus and to take a guided tour from the Vice Chancellor of the campus. And I must say that all of you are very fortunate to be here. I've studied in Delhi at the St. Stephen's College and the Delhi University, and I can say that your campus is about 100x better than Delhi University and St. Stephen's College. So all of you are really, really fortunate to be in such a wonderful campus. I think this is a great institution, a great learning institution. It's grown very rapidly. Got 12 different institutions, one after another. To be able to grow so rapidly, so fast, with such good infrastructure in such a short while is a great tribute to both Mr. Naveen Jindal and to the dynamism and to the big vision of Mr. Rajkumar, Professor Rajkumar, because I have no doubt in my mind that OP Jindal University will emerge as not merely India's topmost university, but will be one of the finest universities in the world in the days to come. It's already amongst the only two in the international rankings. It's done very well. It's done very well. And international rankings are very critical because everything gets correlated in the academic world to international rankings. But I'm quite sure from the position at which your law school and other schools are, they will continue to grow and rise and become some of the finest institutions in the world in the days to come. Let me also compliment both Professor Rajkumar and Professor Mohan Kumar for their vision to establish a Center for G20 Studies. G20 is important because it comprises of about 85% of the global GDP. It accounts for almost 78% of the global trade. It accounts for 90% of the patents in the world. It accounts for almost 2/3 of the global population. But it's important to understand that G20 presidency moves year by year from one country to another. There's no permanent secretariat. And because there's no permanent secretariat, different countries have different perspectives when they become leaders. And they drive it in different manners and they have different priorities. And it's very important to study, analyze, and examine this. Because G20 is essentially an economic grouping. It's a grouping for development, for economic growth, for progress. What were the issues which shaped the priorities of that particular country during that particular year is very critical to understand. And how did that country perform during that period? And how was it able to transform many of the challenges that were facing the global community at that point of time? It's important to study and analyze this. The only other university which does this is the University of Toronto, where 2 professors took it upon themselves to do this. And therefore, I'm really truly delighted that the OP Jindal University has decided to launch the Center for G20 Studies. It'll bring in a lot of academic rigor. It'll bring in a lot of in-depth studies, and it'll really challenge many of you young students to study this. And we in the G20 Secretariat will be very happy to fall back on your studies, give you the opportunity to make to us presentation, and we'll be very, very happy to get you associated with the G20 meetings held in different parts of India. So ladies and gentlemen, let me first say that We are meeting at a point of time when we are going through a period of great upheaval. This is a period of great turbulence across the world. It is important to understand that the post-COVID era has seen almost 200 million people go below the poverty line. Almost 100 million people have lost their jobs. And actually, the huge amount of work on poverty alleviation that had been done in the last 2 decades has all been wiped out in the last 3 years on account of COVID and on account of inflation. And therefore, there's a huge challenge of the post-COVID era. There's a challenge of almost one-third of the world being impacted today by recession. And therefore, vast number of countries of the global south are impacted by recessionary trends. There's a challenge of almost 75 countries in the world facing a global debt crisis. And on top of all this, there's a huge challenge of climate action and climate finance. That is, the earth may survive, but we as human beings will go extinct if we are not able to live up to 1.5 degrees centigrade by 2050. And therefore, each one of us has to be an agent of huge climate action and climate finance, and this will be a huge challenge for the world. And then we've seen a geopolitical crisis in Europe right now, a war which is waging on for over a year. This is the only war which is waged on for such a long time in the post-World War II era. And therefore, this is a major crisis. And this has led to food, fuel, and fertilizer getting impacted in various parts of the world. And in addition to all this, you've seen a new crisis emerging, a financial crisis of the Silicon Valley Bank collapsing in the United States of America and the cascading impacts that it can have in other parts of the world. So these are the challenges before the world. Huge number of challenges. Vast number of challenges. And therefore, when G20 is held in India, it's important to understand that it's a meeting of the top 20 countries of the world, plus 9 other invited countries, plus all the international organizations. That's the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, the WHO, everyone who's involved in shaping the global architecture is involved with the G20. So when we have the leaders meeting on September 9th and 10th in Delhi, there'll be 43 leaders from across the world. 43, it'll be the biggest gathering of leaders across in Delhi at that point of time. So when leaders meet, they have to discuss the challenges facing the global community, the challenges facing the citizens of the world. And therefore, this is a very major priority for India. What do we take forward to transform the world when India has taken over the leadership of the G20? So ladies and gentlemen, when a G20 is held in any country, there are, to my mind, 3 different parameters which determine the success of a presidency. The first and foremost, to my mind, is the political narrative which the country puts out. And the political narrative is important. The second is the priorities that we are putting out to shape the world, which I'll dwell on a little bit. And the third is how well do we execute this presidency on ground. That is, you're going to have about 215 meetings and how well we are going to execute the presidency on ground. G20 is very different from doing a World Cup cricket match or a World Cup football match, which are held for 12 days or 15 days. So you can do a concentrated execution in 12 days, like the World Cup football in Qatar. But G20 presidency starts on the 1st of December and is executed through the year till the 1st of December. Till the next 1st of December, that means 12 months of work around the year. And therefore, it becomes very critical that the execution on ground, along with the content, is top class. So ladies and gentlemen, let me first dwell on the political narrative. That is India's political narrative as far as the G20 is concerned. That is, India is hosting it. We are a democracy. We have elected, when G20 is held in India, the real host is the Prime Minister of India. And therefore, the G20 leadership is driven by the Prime Minister of India, which is Mr. Narendra Modi, and therefore the world looks at him as someone who's got elected democratically for the second time in India, which is very rare in today's phenomena, and whose credit rating in terms of people's acceptance is still very high at 71%. And therefore, how is he viewed as a global leader is very important. But more important than that is the kind of development India has done. And it's important to understand this because in the last few years, India has done a huge amount of digital transformation. All of you have a digital identity. All of you have a bank account. The bank account is linked to your digital identity, that is your Aadhaar and also your mobile. And all of you must be doing all digital payments. So India today does about 11x more payments than what United States and Europe do together. We do more than 4x payment of what China does. We do about 42% of the real-time payments in the world. And therefore, it's important to understand that in the last 7-8 years, India has done a huge amount of digital transformation, a massive amount of digital transformation. And this has been noticed around the world. The other is that in the last few years, we built a huge amount of infrastructure on ground. We've been able to provide 30 million houses to Indian citizens, which is like providing a house to every single Australian. 30 million Indians means that's the size of the population of Australia. So we've been able to provide a house to every single citizen of Australia. We've been able to provide about 110 million toilets. 110 million toilets to the citizens of India, which is like providing a toilet to every single citizen of Germany. And we've been able to provide piped water connection to 243 million households. 243 million households is like providing a water connection to every single individual in Brazil. We've also built about 55,000 kilometers of road. 55,000 kilometers of road means that we've done about 1.5 times the diameter of the earth. We've constructed road equivalent to that. So that has been the development narrative of India. And in addition to this, during the COVID period, we provided 2.2 billion vaccinations to our citizens, which was all digital, which was all paperless, cashless COVID vaccinations to the citizens of India, whereas other countries were struggling with paperwork. So what India has done is really done a huge amount of digital transformation, infrastructure transformation. And as a recent study by the Bank of International Settlement, BIS, has said that India has achieved in the last 8 years what India would normally have taken 50 years to achieve. So what we've done in 8 years is what would have taken 50 years to achieve, simply because we did a huge amount of digital infrastructure transformation, a huge amount of infrastructure growth that we've built up in the last few years. So this political narrative and the development narrative of India is important. The second is, what are our priorities for G20? And it's important to dwell a little bit on them. First and foremost, at a time when the world is facing huge recessionary trends across the world, and 1/3 of the world is facing a massive recession in the global south, it's important that we talk about inclusive, resilient, sustainable growth. Because without growth, we'll not be able to lift people above poverty line, we'll not be able to provide them education and health, and therefore resilient growth, sustainable growth, and growth alone will impact the citizens of the world, and growth alone will have a huge impact on the lives of citizens in the global south is very critical. So first and foremost, how does India work with the rest of the world to drive inclusive, resilient, and sustainable growth? The second, which is very important, is that the COVID era, as I said, has seen vast number of people, 200 million people going below the poverty line. We are at the midway point of the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. The 2030 was the point of which every country had accepted that we'll be able to implement the Sustainable Development Goals. Because of COVID, instead of progressing, we have regressed. Instead of progressing, we have regressed. The world has regressed, and a vast segment of population has got impacted on learning outcomes, on health outcomes, and therefore the world needs to craft out a totally new SDG action plan to lift people above the poverty line. So all the sustainable goals have got impacted because of COVID and inflation, and therefore a completely new action plan, a new vision of how to transform the lives of citizens across the world has to be spelled out. And that is what a new goal, a new sustainable development goal action plan needs to be spelled out. Thirdly is the challenge of climate action and climate finance. We in India are not responsible for carbonizing the world. The developed world, when they were industrializing, have carbonized the world. They've occupied 88% of the total carbon space available. Out of the 2,800 gigatons of carbon space available at 1.5 degrees centigrade, we've occupied very little, just 52 gigatons, which is 1.5% of the total carbon space available. Very little, whereas we are logically entitled to about 17.5% on the basis of our per capita income. But irrespective of that, India will become, as we industrialize in the years to come, we'll become the third biggest polluters in the world. And therefore, India must become the first country in the world to industrialize without carbonizing the world. And therefore, it's a challenge for each one of us to actually shape the world and shape the future of India. Even if we do 100% renewable, the electricity component is just 20% of the energy. And therefore, we need to decarbonize many of the hard-to-abate sectors like refinery, like steel, cement, long-distance transportation, fertilizer. And this would require a huge amount of new technology in terms of green hydrogen. It'll require long-term financing. And all this climate action is what Prime Minister has talked about in his Panch Amrit at Glasgow, that India wants to lead the world in climate action, in climate finance. It lead the world through a new way of life, what he terms as the lifestyle for sustainability, life, that is nudging people into behavioral change, nudging people into ensuring that tube lights are switched off, nudging people into ensuring that we live in another era where we are able to close our taps, cycle to work, do new forms of urbanization which are not carbon intensive. That is what life is about. But as we shape the future of the world through climate action, it's important that countries, emerging countries like India and the developing countries of the South, which are most vulnerable to climate action, are also able to get long-term financing of 30 years at low rates of interest. The developed world, which has accounted for most of the carbonization in the world, had in 2009 at Copenhagen committed to providing $100 billion a year. $100 billion a year to which they have not lived up to. But irrespective of that, there's a lot of private capital available. But for private capital to flow in to emerging markets, it's important to understand that the risks of Asia and the risk of Africa are very different from the risk of the developed world. The developed world gets money at 2% rate of interest. In India, we get money at 8% rate of interest. Africa, you get money at 16% rate of interest. In sub-Saharan countries, you get money at 22% rate of interest. And therefore, India is not able to access long-term finance at 8% rate of interest, and therefore risks of India need to be de-risked along with other parts of the world. And therefore, institutions like World Bank and International Monetary Fund, they are very critical institutions which need to provide long-term lending based on blended finance, credit enhancement, what is now known as first loss guarantees to enable resources to flow into many of these emerging markets. But World Bank and IMF were designed in post-World War II. They are Bretton Woods institutions which are not designed for either sustainable development goals or for financing climate action. So it's important that these institutions are reshaped, they are restructured for the world of today, which is facing challenges of sustainable development goals and of climate action. And that is one of India's key priorities. That is, how do you reshape a new world of today where you have to transform the lives of citizens and you need to transform the lives of climate action based on climate action through these multilateral financial institutions, and how do you get the global South out of debt. And that is why when we started off our G20 presidency, one of the first few things the Prime Minister did was to interact with 122 countries of the global South and get their inputs. so that their inputs could form a very major component of our own priorities. And one of the things that very clearly came out is that the multilateral financial institutions of the post-World War II period have not had a major impact on the lives of citizens in any of these developing countries of the South based on their experiences. And therefore, our focus would be on how to reconfigure, restructure, redesign these multilateral financial institutions. And then the next priority is about digital transformation and about digital public infrastructure which India has built up. Our belief is, based on our own experience, that if you want to transform lives of citizens, digital transformation will be very critical, as India has demonstrated. In India itself, we've been able to provide, during the COVID period, 800 million people money straight into their bank accounts. And not a single paisa of leakage. When I was growing up as a young officer in Kerala, money used to be transferred from the central government to the state government to the districts, and almost 80 to 85% there used to be leakage. Very little money used to reach the actual beneficiary. But today you can put money straight into the bank accounts, and actually the beneficiary is able to get money without any leakages. So what we've been able to build with digital identity, with opening of bank accounts and by linking Aadhaar and mobile number to this bank account, has been truly transformational. When I was again a young officer, one of my jobs was to transform the lives of traditional fishermen in Kerala. And I worked for about 3.5, 4 years on this, making self-help groups of fishermen and fisherwomen. And we were able to provide them new technology. We gave them outboard motors, we gave them new crafts, fiberglass crafts. They could go much further into the sea. We gave them new fishing nets, which were then known as the disco nets. But the biggest challenge was that the fishermen were prone to drinking. And what they would earn in one day, they would drink the same night. And they would not have anything left for a day when they could not go to fish because of rains or monsoons. And therefore, it was very important to open their bank accounts. Opening their bank accounts, know your customer, was a nightmare. It used to take me 8, 9 months chasing bank managers, physical bank managers, to open their bank accounts. Today in India, you open a bank account in less than a minute using your biometric. So I've seen this transformation from 9 months to less than a minute in opening bank accounts for beneficiary. And therefore, when Jio started giving mobiles to many of you people, it acquired it got 220 million customers. 220 million customers in less than 100 days. 220 million in less than 100 days, because the cost of acquisition due to digital technology had fallen to less than $1 as compared to $28 before this digital identity had been built up. In Europe and America today, it costs almost about $150 to acquire a customer. In India, it has fallen to less than $1. So what India has done is to do innovation at population scale and spread this out, and at low cost. At low cost, we've been able to bring in huge innovation across the country. And therefore, this digital transformation is something which will drive the growth of India for the next 3 decades. All our innovations are open source, open APIs, they are interoperable, so everybody can innovate on top of them. And that is the model which has been built up. So if you look at the last 2 decades, a lot of innovation has happened in the world. But all this innovation has happened because of big tech. It's happened because of Google, Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, and in the case of China, by Alibaba and by Tencent. So big tech, but they could innovate because they took your data. They took all data of individual citizens and used that for AI and machine learnings and did that. In the case of Europe, they followed another model, which is called the GDPR. They said we'll ensure the safety of data for citizens, but in the process, they killed privacy. And therefore, you've not seen many innovations emerging from Europe in the last 2 decades. India has done something very different. India built the railway tracks, the public track on which we've allowed private sector to innovate. So India is the only country where PhonePe competes with Google Pay, Paytm competes with WhatsApp, all in the marketplace. So you have 40 different apps competing with each other in the market space, and all of you are using them for payments today. And at the click of a button, you are able to buy anything digitally and get them. And therefore, what India has done through COVID, through DigiLocker, where all your records are maintained, through UPI, through FASTags, is something very unique, very innovative. And what we are doing in education through Diksha and Swayam is very, very innovative. It's path-breaking. It's actually transformational for the rest of the world in the days to come. And therefore, India's model is unique, and we think that there is a huge India story to the digital transformation through which we can transform, we can help other countries to transform the world. It's important because if you look around the world, there are 4 billion people who do not have a digital identity. There are 2 billion people who do not even have a bank account. There are 133 countries in the world who do not have a fast payment mechanism. They are not fortunate like many of you studying here who can actually buy digitally, because these countries do not have a digital fast payment mechanism. Their citizens do not have a digital identity. So much of what India has done to transform itself can be taken to other parts of the global south and really help to transform the lives of citizens there. And lastly, our next priority is about women-led development. And women-led development is important because in India today, the latest NFHS survey shows that there are more women than men in India, 1,022 women to 1,000 men. And our belief is that it will be impossible for India to grow at rapid pace of 8 to 9, 10% year after year for 3 decades without women being a very major contributor to the economic growth and development of India. And across the world, it will be very different, but difficult across Africa, across sub-Saharan Africa, all these countries, without women being put into positions of eminence, without improving their learning outcomes, without improving their health outcomes, and without focusing on this virtuous cycle of malnutrition where the mothers, the children, and we have a lot of stunted children in India simply because we are not able to provide good nutrition. And therefore, this whole cycle of women driving growth and progress and development is very, very critical. According to the World Economic Forum, it will take 132 years to bring parity between men and women. Our view is that we should be able to do this in one generation. Transform this. How to do this is something which G20 will take it forward, putting a greater amount of leadership, greater amount of wealth, putting huge amount of resources into women to become leaders of tomorrow to drive the world is very critical. And therefore, women-led development is a major priority. And the last point I want to make is about how do you conduct a G20. So, as I said, cricket matches are held for a concentrated period of 12 days, as many of you are watching the T20 matches. Many of you would have seen World Cup football, Qatar, few days, but G20 presidency is for a year. In most countries, G20 meetings are held in the capital city or another city, so 2 cities is the maximum. In India's case, the Prime Minister said that we'll do G20 as a people's presidency, as a Jan Bhagidari, and we'll take it out to different states of India. So we are holding G20 meetings, about 215 meetings in over all the states of Union Territories of India. So every single state of India, every single Union Territory of India, and in over 60 cities of India. So we are viewing this as an opportunity to really transform these cities in terms of their infrastructure, their drainage, their solid waste, their roads, so we've done meetings across Udaipur where the Fatehpur Lake was transformed, the roads were transformed, Udaipur as a city was transformed, Kumargam backwaters were transformed, Aurangabad, Pune, Mumbai. Many of these cities have been transformed because we are holding G20 presidency there. And this has been a great example of cooperative federalism, of working with the states. The other big opportunity has been to use the states to push their culture and to push their soft power. and actually push the brand of the states into the global markets. And therefore, the states have put their best cultural art forms out. They've used this opportunity to promote their handloom, their handicrafts, and to promote their one district, one product, all this. And therefore, we worked in partnership with all the states, almost 60 cities of India, to promote and market G20. We've also used this opportunity to promote millets in a very big way, because we feel that they are far more, they have iron, they have protein, they have a huge amount of calcium, and they're far more, we need to move away from water consuming crops like water and rice and wheat to millets, which are extremely rich in good protein content, and therefore every single meal that we've served, we've used millets in a very big way. So ladies and gentlemen, I've dwelt on the broad perspective of what's happening across the world. I've given you a perspective of the political and development narrative of India. I've given you a perspective of what our priorities are in terms of trying to reshape and reconfigure the world. I've given you a perspective of what how India is planning to execute, and we've already executed about 100 meetings. So close to about 100 meetings have already been done, and another 115 meetings to follow in the next couple of months before we hold our meeting, our leaders summit on September 9th and 10th. Now, the work that has been done requires a lot of intellectual backing in terms of getting a lot of experts, huge number of consultants to bring out issue notes, which are then sent out across the world. People respond to that, different countries respond to that. We get their perspective, and finally a leader's communique comes out. A leader's communique is very important because that shows the ambitious, as the Prime Minister said, that India's presidency will be very inclusive, it'll be very decisive, it'll be very ambitious, and it'll be action-oriented. So our objective is really to make it a very action-oriented presidency, which we'll continue to do. There will be challenges of geopolitics during this presidency, but like Bali did last year, Bali had a huge amount of geopolitical conflict throughout its presidency, but eventually the Sherpas, and Sherpa acts like an envoy to the leader, which is the Prime Minister. We were able to figure out how to do this, and we were able to find a way, a final solution because this is an economic grouping, it does not discuss political issues, but the issue of the war is having a huge impact on food, fuel, and fertilizer. That is what the G7 argument is, and in reality it is having a huge impact. But we took the UN General Assembly is the political body. The UN General Assembly and the UN Security Council discuss all political matters. So finally we took the resolution of the UN General Assembly and put it as a part of the G20 preamble so that we could get a consensus around G20. We are very optimistic, we are very hopeful that we'll come out with a very, very inclusive and a very action-oriented communique at the end of this, and we'll make it we'll bring everybody on board and make it consensus-oriented. So I look forward to all of you analyzing, I look forward to all of you studying, I look forward to a lot of you contributing intellectually, and a lot of you writing about the G20 presidency, and we'll be very happy to work in very close collaboration and partnership with all of you. Any help, any assistance, any support that you need, we'll all be there to provide you all support from the G20 presidency. And those of you who do the best work, we'll be very delighted to welcome you to the G20 Secretariat and to probably meet the Sherpas at the next round of meeting in Delhi whenever they are there. So thank you very much. I'm truly delighted to be here, and I'm really fascinated to see this wonderful university and to see the bright, brilliant young faces who are all assembled here today. Thank you very much. Go on to become a great champion of G20. Thank you so much.